A surgeon's stand. The ordeal of Dr. Elijah Matthews. The emergency room at St. Jude's Hospital hummed with its typical, controlled chaos. Monitors beeped, phones chirped, and the low murmur of voices created a backdrop for the constant, life or death decisions being made. In the eye of this storm was Dr. Elijah Matthews, a black surgeon whose reputation was built on a foundation of quiet competence and an almost preternatural calm. He was a pillar of the staff, a man whose hands, steady and sure, had saved countless lives. But on this particular Tuesday, his surgical triumph would be overshadowed by a torrent of bitter prejudice. The patient was Bethany Wallace, a 56-year-old white woman who had been rushed to the hospital in critical condition after collapsing at her home in the upscale suburbs of Westchester. The surgery was long and complex, a delicate dance of skill and endurance that pushed Elijah and his team to their limits. Hours later, as he stepped away from the operating table, he felt the familiar wave of exhaustion mixed with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had done his job, and Ms. Wallace was alive, on her way to a full and complete recovery. Yet, his satisfaction was short-lived. When Ms. Wallace regained consciousness in the recovery room, she saw her surgeon, and her face contorted in a mask of contempt. "Get away from me," she hissed, her voice a sharp blade cutting through the humming quiet of the room. "I want to speak to the real doctor, not you." Elijah, a man who had faced down racism in its many forms throughout his career, remained unfazed. He calmly explained that he was the surgeon who had saved her life, but his words were met with a dismissive sneer. She refused to acknowledge his skill, his professionalism, or the fact that he was the reason she was still breathing. Instead, she demanded to see the hospital director, Dr. Karen Holloway, with the explicit goal of getting Elijah fired. The war in the hospital. From that moment on, Ms. Wallace turned her hospital stay into a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. She weaponized her pain, exaggerating every ache and twinge, and blamed it all on Elijah. She accused him of botching the surgery, of intentionally harming her because of his prejudice against people like her. Despite her vital signs being perfectly normal and her recovery progressing ahead of schedule, she insisted she was suffering, a theatrical performance designed to generate sympathy and validate her hatred. The constant barrage of insults and racist slurs was a heavy emotional burden, a weight that tested Elijah's remarkable composure. But he refused to let her win. He continued to do his job with unwavering excellence, his professionalism a shield against her vitriol. The hospital staff, from the nurses who grew tired of her endless demands to Security Chief Greg Sanders, rallied behind him, offering quiet words of support and encouragement. The atmosphere in the hospital became strained. Nurses would sigh with reluctance when their shift brought them to Ms. Wallace's room. Other patients and their families, catching glimpses of her outbursts, whispered about the hostile environment she created. The entire wing seemed to hold its breath whenever Elijah was scheduled 4 rounds on her floor. Yet, Elijah's resolve only hardened. He was not just a doctor treating a patient, he was a man standing up for his own dignity, and the dignity of every person who had faced similar discrimination. He had come too far, worked too hard, to be undone by one person's ignorance. On her final day at the hospital, Ms. Wallace made a last, desperate stand. She refused to leave, holding her discharge hostage to a final confrontation. Elijah, recognizing that this was an unwinnable battle of wills, had no choice but to call security. As she was escorted out, her furious screams and threats echoed down the hallway, a public spectacle of her hatred. "You think this is over?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Elijah. "I'll be back, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did to me. I will ruin you." Her threat, a chilling promise, hung in the air long after she was gone. A battle of perception. The lawsuit and the courtroom days later. True to her word, Ms. Wallace returned with a lawyer, a slick, ambitious man named Mr. Thompson, and filed a lawsuit against Elijah and St. Jude's Hospital for medical negligence and racial discrimination. The legal battle was a prolonged and emotionally exhausting affair, a public spectacle that threatened to tarnish Elijah's impeccable reputation and career. He found himself spending countless hours with the hospital's legal team, poring over medical records and recounting every minute detail of the surgery and the subsequent care he provided. The process was draining, a constant reminder of the fact that he was being judged not for his work, but for the color of his skin. The lawsuit became a media spectacle. Local news outlets picked up the story, portraying it as a David versus Goliath battle, though they rarely mentioned the racial undertones in their early reports. Ms. Wallace, in her interviews, painted a picture of a broken, betrayed patient who had been subjected to a shoddy surgery by an incompetent doctor. Her narrative, however, had an Achilles heel. It was entirely fabricated. In the courtroom, the truth proved to be a powerful weapon. Jude's legal team, led by a formidable and no-nonsense attorney named Ms. Rodriguez, presented a meticulous defense. They had a mountain of evidence, including Elijah's flawless record, a detailed account of the successful surgery, and testimonies from leading medical experts who spoke to his skill and professionalism. Nurses' daily logs meticulously documented Ms. Wallace's theatrical wincing and groaning, and her history of refusing medication and physical therapy was laid bare. The turning point came when Elijah himself took the stand. Under cross-examination by Mr. Thompson, he was calm and methodical. Mr. Thompson tried to bait him, to get him to lose his temper, to admit to even the slightest mistake. But Elijah didn't waver. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who knew his truth. He calmly explained the procedure, the recovery process, and why Ms. Wallace's claims of pain were not only inconsistent with her medical records, but with the typical recovery from such a surgery. When Mr. Thompson finally asked if he believed Ms. Wallace's claims were racially motivated, Elijah looked him directly in the eye. "I know they are," he said, his voice steady, "because I've seen this before. She can't accept that the person who saved her life looks like me." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The judge, a seasoned veteran of the legal system, was not swayed by Ms. Wallace's theatrics. He saw through her flimsy claims and saw the prejudice that lay beneath. In his final ruling, he not only dismissed the case with prejudice, but he also admonished Ms. Wallace for wasting the court's time and for her unfounded and malicious accusations. He made it clear that her lawsuit was a frivolous and racially motivated act, and the hospital would be well within its rights to pursue legal action against her. The aftermath and a new dawn. Elijah was vindicated, but the victory was bittersweet. He had won the battle, but the scars remained, a painful reminder of the prejudice he faced. The ordeal had taken an immense toll, leaving him emotionally drained and exhausted. He returned to work not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet weariness. Yet, in the days that followed, something shifted. His colleagues' support, once a quiet and private affair, became more open and pronounced. Nurses gave him genuine smiles of relief, and other doctors, both junior and senior, offered words of respect and solidarity. Dr. Holloway pulled him aside, her eyes filled with pride. "You didn't just win a lawsuit, Elijah," she said softly. "You won a moral victory. You stood your ground, and you did it with grace. We're all better for it." Elijah, in the quiet moments between surgeries, reflected on the ordeal. He knew the fight was not truly over. There would be other patients like Ms. Wallace, other moments where he would be judged not for his immense skill, but for his race. But he also knew he would be ready. The experience had taught him that while he could not control the actions of others, he could control his own response. He could not stop people from seeing his skin color first, but he could ensure that his work and his character would speak louder than any hatred. He was a brilliant surgeon, a man of quiet dignity and unwavering resolve, and his work was his ultimate testament. He was a pillar of his community, a hero in his hospital, and a testament to the fact that excellence and character will always triumph over prejudice. He had earned his place, and no amount of hate could ever take that away from him. With a sense of renewed purpose, Dr. Elijah Matthews stepped back into the bustling rhythm of the ready for whatever challenges came his way, his head held high, and his hands still steady as a rock.